Good evening and welcome to a Vegas PBS election special. For the next 30 minutes, I'll be moderating a debate featuring the Democratic and Republican candidates running in Congressional District Number 3. The candidates will be making opening and closing statements. They will respond to questions that I will ask of each candidate. The campaigns have agreed to exclude candidate-to-candidate questions. And now I'd like to introduce the candidates participating in the debate. They are Republican incumbent Congressman Joe Heck and Democratic Assembly Speaker John Oceguera. Let's begin. According to the coin toss, Speaker Oceguera, you have the first opening statement.
Good evening. I'm John Oceguera, and I'd like to thank Mitch Fox and PBS for putting this together, as well as all of you watching at home. For all the talk coming out of Washington, all we get is bickering and fighting, not solving any problems. All people want is some solutions. I know what it's like to struggle. Was raised by a single mom, worked my way through school, joined the fire department. The fight for the middle class is in my bones. It's why I'm running for Congress. The bottom line, we've got to balance the budget, but we've got to do it the right way. Cut programs that aren't working, and tax breaks for corporations shipping jobs overseas. Protect Medicare and Social Security for seniors who've paid into it after a lifetime of hard work. We've got to get the economy back on track and get Nevadans back to work. And it shouldn't matter if it's a Democratic or Republican idea. If it creates jobs or solves problems, I'm going to be for it.
Okay, Congressman Heck, your opening statement.
Well, thanks, Mitch, and thanks to Vegas PBS for hosting the debate and for all of you that are watching. You know, 2 years ago, the voters of Southern Nevada had decided that they had suffered long enough with high unemployment and foreclosure rates, the increasing costs of putting food on their table and gas in their cars, and the uncertainty associated with the new health care law. As we struggle with those problems today, it is no less important to send someone to Washington who understands those issues and who will fight for the best interests of the men, women, and families of Southern Nevada. Tonight, you'll probably hear two different visions for the future of our community and our country. The first is a pathway to a larger, more intrusive government with a broken social safety net, more spending, more debt, and more taxes. The other is a pathway to a more efficient government, where we have a safety net that is protected and preserved for future generations, where we rein in our spending, lower our debt, and allow you to keep more of your hard-earned money. That's the path I'll be talking about this evening, because that is the path to more jobs, more opportunity, and more prosperity.
Thank you very much. And Speaker Oceguera, you have the first question. During several prior interviews, you refused to answer questions about whether you support the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. I'm asking for a simple yes or no answer, and then you can elaborate on your response. Do you support the Affordable Care Act, including the individual mandate and an expansion of Medicaid by the states? Yes or no?
Thanks, Mitch. Yes, and this is why. My wife, Janie, was just about to have a baby about a year ago. I was just retiring from the fire department, and we had to pay our own health insurance. That cost was $1,440 a month. Now, I could afford it, but I know many people who could not afford that. We've got to bring down the cost of health care in this country. Now, I believe that the health care law was a good start, and we've got to expand on that. My opponent has voted to repeal this law, and he's done it 30 times. That'll cause 33 million people in this country to not be on health care. What are some good things in this bill? If you're 26 and under, you can stay on your parents' health insurance. There's no caps on the amount of money that insurance can pay. And the pre-existing condition is something that I think is good too. So we ought to reform, but we ought to keep going.
Congressman Heck, your response.
Well, Mitch, as I've always said, there are good things within the health care law, and I've always talked about repealing, repairing, and replacing. There are things that we need to keep, like no pre-existing condition exclusions, like no lifetime caps, or rights of rescission where people can't be kicked off their policy the day after they get sick. But those good things are in about the first 50 pages of the bill. Then there's 2,650 pages of the bill that really have some things nothing to do with health care. And so we have to go in and figure out ways that we can provide stability and security for people with insurance, an option for people without insurance, and more importantly, how to bring down the rising cost of health care, because that will make health insurance more affordable for everyone. And in fact, I have introduced legislation, H.R. 4242, which would do just that. It keeps those important health insurance reform provisions while opening up additional pathways for people without insurance to be able to get cost-effective coverage. We have the best healthcare system in the world. What we have to do is make sure that more Americans have access to that healthcare system. As someone that's practiced medicine in this community for over 20 years in the emergency department, I've been on the front lines and I've seen what works and doesn't work, and I'm there for repair, repeal, replace.
Thank you. Speaker Oceguera, do you have a response?
I do. Congressman Heck says that he wants to repeal and replace, but that's just not what he's done over the last 2 years. That an election year is good, but he said that this bill is a horrible bill and that he'll do everything he can do to get rid of it, and he's done just that. I agree, we have to bring costs down, and we should work on that just the way that we are right now. Let's reform and let's keep working on it, but we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay, Representative Heck, you have the next question. Democrats have attacked you over a statement you made on June 2nd, 2011, in which you called Social Security a pyramid scheme. You subsequently said it was a poor choice of words, but here's my question. If current wage earners are paying for the benefits of current retirees, why isn't it a pyramid scheme, or at least a Ponzi scheme, as Paul Ryan has suggested? As a solution, do you support allowing individuals to divert a portion of their Social Security payroll taxes into a personal retirement account?
Well, thanks, Mitch. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked in an emergency department for over 20 years in this community, and part of that is knowing how to present bad news to folks. I mean, I can tell you the truth, or I can tell you what you want to hear. And the fact is, the Social Security trustees have said Social Security will not be able to pay full benefits by the year 2037. So we have to look at ways to make structural reforms that provide the benefit that current seniors expect and near retirees expect, while preserving and protecting the program for future generations. And so that's what I was talking about when I was talking about Social Security. Part of the problem right now is the high unemployment rates under this administration, and we have fewer people paying into the system because they're not working. So the first thing to help shore up Social Security is get the economy started, get people back to work so that more people are paying into the system. After that, we need to look at other ways to increase the solvency of the program for the out years, and that could include allowing people to pay into a private account. It could include changing the retirement age. It could include raising the cap on the amount of earnings to which Social Security is taxed.
Okay. Speaker Oceguera.
Congressman Heck says that he had a bad choice of words. However, he's quadrupled down on that and said it multiple times. I want to preserve and protect this program. I don't want to privatize it and turn it over to Wall Street. I think what happened was Congressman Heck got caught saying what he meant. We will have, just recently he said again, we will have to get into Social Security and Medicare if we want to fix this debt. I think that's what he means. He wants to privatize it, and I just won't do that. I'll preserve this program for generations to come.
Okay. And Representative Heck, you have a response?
Well, what I was saying was that when 60% of the federal budget is driven by interest on our debt, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, that if we're really going to get serious about bringing our debt under control, we have to look at structural changes to programs that preserve and protect it for current retirees and near retirees, and then make sure that it's present for those that are going to retire in the near future. So that's what I'm committed to doing, and I think that every option has to be on the table to make sure that the program that seniors currently rely on and that future generations are going to rely on will be around when they need it.
Speaker Oceguera, you have the next question. You said that you want to protect small business, but how can you do that when you want to let the Bush tax cuts expire for those making over $250,000? Aren't those the very job creators we want to protect? And if they have less money in their pocket, do you really think they're going to hire more people?
Thanks for the question, Mitch. Two things. I think that the majority of jobs are created in small businesses in this country, and a majority of those jobs majority of those businesses are right in someone's home. We ought to give a small home office tax deduction, a simple one, and we ought to do that right now. That would help small business. On top of that, Congress in 2010 approved doubling the startup deduction for small businesses from $5,000 to $10,000. We ought to make that permanent. Those are ways that we can help small business. But there's other things we can do as well. We've got to invest in our education system. If we invest in our education system, whether it's early childhood education, K through 12, or higher education, we're going to have an educated workforce, and that will help us to propel ourselves into the future.
Let me follow up on that. Getting back to the expiration of those Bush tax cuts for those making over $250,000, would those people be less inclined, if they're small business owners, to hire people if they're paying higher taxes?
Following up with me?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. So on taxes, let's just talk about this. This has got to be a global solution here. Taxes, I do agree. I do believe that we should have to that we should end the Bush tax cuts on those who make over $250,000. I also agree that we should institute the Buffett rule, but I also agree that we should quit giving tax breaks to big oil and corporations shipping jobs overseas. Now, it's a balanced approach, though, Mitch. The balanced approach would be cutting where we need to cut. And I can give you an example. There's 50 different programs, over 20 different agencies that deal with financial literacy. We should combine and consolidate those programs so that we are in a position to grow the economy, because overall, what's going to help us here is growing the economy, not arguing about taxes and cuts every year, growing the economy.
Okay, Representative Heck.
Well, it's interesting that my opponent wants to be the champion of small business when, while in the Assembly, he raised the modified business tax and doubled the business licensing fee. And while he talks about wanting to give a home office deduction, that's already permitted under the current tax code. The fact that he wants to let the taxes increase on small businesses shows that he's out of touch with what really drives small business owners. 90% of businesses in the state of Nevada are small businesses, and they're pass-through corporations that report their taxes on their personal return. They employ 54% of Nevada's workforce. And while all of them may not be making $250,000 now, what's their incentive to want to grow and make that amount of money when they know that they're going to wind up paying more in taxes? I've traveled the district. I've talked to many business owners, and right now they're not hiring, even if they have the ability and they have the business to put somebody else on the payroll, because they're not sure what's going to happen on January 1st. They're afraid that if they hire somebody now, they may need to let them go in February or March when their tax rates go up. We need to provide stability and certainty right now to our small business owners so that they can start to grow the economy.
Mr. Oceguera, you have 30 seconds to rebut if you'd like.
Sure. What Congressman Heck forgets on the modified business tax is that we actually lowered taxes for 74% of all businesses in this state. On top of that, he talks about the business license fee. We raised the business license fee, it is true, from 100 to 200. And we closed the loopholes where thousands of businesses were escaping paying the modified business tax. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's right. And if you're going to do business in the state, I don't think $100 or $200 is too much to ask.
Okay, Congressman Heck, you have the next question. Has to do with the foreclosure crisis. Bloomberg reported that Nevada is the only state in the nation in which the total value of single-family homes is less than the amount owed on them. Some say Congressional District 3 has been the epicenter of the housing crisis. What has your office done to help struggling homeowners, and why haven't we seen a turnaround?
Well, thanks, Mitch. Actually, I give a great deal of credit to my district office staff and what they have done for homeowners in helping them navigate the very difficult process of trying to keep their homes. But what have we done back in Washington to try to help solve the problem? I was one of the few, actually the only in my party, to vote to maintain certain housing programs when the rest of the party wanted to do away with them. And I was told, well, they only helped 17,000 people in Nevada. But if you talk to one of those 17,000 people, that program was important to them, and I voted to maintain that. In addition, we found now that one of the biggest issues are folks that have lost their home to short sale or foreclosure who are in a position to get back into a home but can't because of that negative mark on their credit report. So we've introduced legislation called the Second Chance at Home Ownership Act that would allow folks who are currently renting to be able to get back into a home as long as the cost of the mortgage wasn't more than their current rent, and forgive them that negative mark on their credit report. Because we know that home ownership adds secondary jobs to our community. It helps restore our communities, and that'll help raise everybody's property values.
Okay. Mr. Oceguera.
You know, every night when I drive home, I drive down my street, and there's not one home on my street besides mine that is not foreclosed on, short sold, or that people have walked away from. I myself am 50% underwater in my own home. I think there's a couple things that we should be doing here. One, we had a mediation program at the state level that forced banks and homeowners to get together It's a model program. We should be copying that at the federal level as well. Second thing we should be doing is principal reduction. We ought to be looking at principal reduction, but everybody's got to have skin in that game. So if you're the bank, you win because you don't have to sell your house at the sale. If you're the homeowner, you win because you stay in your house. On the flip side, though, the bank gets a piece of the action on the backside when you sell that house. Congressman Heck voted for a bill that would make affordable housing harder to obtain for low income and seniors. I don't think that's the way to go. I think we should try to keep people in their houses.
Thank you, Congressman Heck.
Well, again, our office has been very involved in helping people stay into their homes, and we've introduced legislation to help people get back into their homes. But what's of note is legislation that my opponent supported while in the Assembly that actually put a stop to the foreclosure process, and now we have an artificial decrease in the number of foreclosures moving forward here in Southern Nevada, and we're only going to see a double dip once the banks understand the new rules that have been put into place. So we really haven't helped anybody get through the process. We've simply delayed it with that legislation.
Okay, my next question is for you, Speaker Oceguera. On foreign policy, actually, has the president done everything he could to protect the security of Israel? Do you support an Israeli plan to attack Iran if it was confirmed that Iran was close to possessing a nuclear weapon?
Mitch, we've got to do everything we possibly can to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. The threat is real, and we have to make sure that we use every tool in our toolbox, whether that's diplomacy, whether that's sanctions, or the threat of military force. I believe that Israel is one of our closest allies, and we've got to stand by Israel at every opportunity. I think the Congressman and I will probably agree on that. Iran having a nuclear weapon is an absolute threat to the safety of the global economy and to the United States as well.
So you would support an Israeli plan to attack Iran if they determined that they were close to possessing a nuclear weapon?
I believe that we have to support our allies, and we would have to take every method possible before military action. But if military action was required, then I would be willing to do that.
So that would be a yes. Okay, Congressman Heck.
Well, certainly I think there's a little nuance here that needs to be understood. The question is not whether or not Iran gets a nuclear weapon. We have to prevent Iran from getting the capability to have a nuclear weapon, because once they have it, the horse is out of the barn. And so that's the difference. And I think the issue with this administration is their failure to issue a red line, a line once Iran passes where we will engage and take action. We have to support Israel in their actions to be able to secure the sovereignty of their state. I had the opportunity to travel to Israel recently and meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu and discuss this issue in detail. And I would firmly support any actions that Israel would take to defend itself against a nuclear-armed Iran.
Okay, Speaker Oceguera, you have the last word.
I think we have discussed this. We're close on this. I just would use diplomacy. I would use sanctions, but I would not rule out the threat of military action.
Okay. Representative Heck, you have the next question on education. The Clark County School District is the 5th largest in the nation. With more and more states getting waivers from President Bush's No Child Left Behind, what is your plan to provide accountability and the resources to increase student achievement in public schools?
Well, thanks, Mitch. And obviously, the next generation of leaders are being groomed right now in our classrooms throughout Clark County. And we have to make sure that the school district has the resources necessary to properly educate our future leaders. As a member of the Education Committee, I've been involved in the reauthorization of what we're going back to as the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, what the education bill was known prior to being called No Child Left Behind. And what we want to do is give local school districts much more flexibility. The fact is only about 10% of a school district's budget comes from the federal government, but it comes with so many strings attached that they can't use the money to its best effectiveness because they have to meet the requirements of spending it where we tell them to spend it. We're saying, you know, if you meet all the requirements in one area, meet the intent of the law, and you have money left over, we don't want to force you to spend it there. We want you to spend it where you need it. We also need to get away from many of the criteria instituted by No Child Left Behind and allow the districts, as they're doing here with the growth model, to come up with a mechanism to judge the growth of their own students within their own districts and report that data for accountability back to the federal government.
Okay, Speaker Oceguera.
You know, education has played a huge role in my life. My mom was just 16 when she got pregnant with me, and I watched her get her high school diploma and then I watched her get a college diploma. And it's what took our family from a poor family to a middle-class family. Congressman Heck wants to cut Pell Grants. I don't. My mom went to school on a Pell Grant. I went to school on a Pell Grant, and I know hundreds of thousands of students across this country go to school on Pell Grants. He also wants to cut Head Start. That's a program that gives kids the start they need. I drop my kids off at UNLV's preschool every morning because I believe in the value of early childhood education. College loans is another area where we disagree. Congressman Heck wants to turn college loans over to the banks again. I don't think that's where they should be. His view is we should cut education. My view is we should invest in education. And it's a long history. In the legislature, when we served together, he voted to cut textbooks and supplies.
Thank you very much, Congressman Heck.
Well, my opponent is moving with blatantly false statements about cutting Head Start. The tactic is you look at what the budget cut's going to be and then find the thing that's going to resonate most with the folks back home and use that as an example of the dire situation that any cut to spending may cause. There is nothing in any of the things that we voted on that would actually cut Head Start directly. And the issue with education, especially post-secondary, is how are we going to control the costs? Just putting more money into the system and allowing schools to charge whatever they can get will never help more students achieve their dream of a post-secondary education.
Thank you very much. And I think we have time for one more question, and this is on the subject of abortion. Speaker Oceguera, you've been criticized by several political pundits for an ad you're running that claims that Congressman Joe Heck, quote, tried to restrict rape victims' access to abortion. Two questions. Are you willing to stand by that ad and explain how your position on abortion differs from your opponent?
Thank you, Mitch. Yes, I will stand by that ad, and here's why. Congressman Heck's record on women's health and safety is clear. He voted to weaken the Violence Against Women Act. He voted twice to defund Planned Parenthood. He voted to make it so that the IRS could go in and audit a rape victim to ask them to have them prove that they'd been raped. It doesn't stop there, though. It goes back to his history in the legislature where he voted to not fund domestic violence programs, rape crisis programs, and a vaccine to help women be protected from cervical cancer. I don't think this is a women's issue. I think every husband, every father, every son, every brother should be interested in what Congressman Heck's voting record is on this issue.
Okay, Congressman Heck.
Well, there he goes again with these blatantly false accusations, which have been widely panned throughout the independent media. Fact is, I voted for the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which contained an additional $660 million for domestic violence protection. The votes that he references in the Senate was the end of session pork bills that had 30 to 40 different little pet projects, some of which very reasonable and very worthwhile, but which never received a public hearing. I'm into transparency and accountability. If my opponent wants to pass bills and pet projects and pork in the middle of the night, what will he do in Congress? I think the public has a right to know where their taxpayer dollars are going. I think that my position on abortion has always been the same and has been clear. I believe that federal dollars, as is current law, should not be used to fund abortions, with the exception of rape, incest, and life of the mother. That's what my voting record shows. That's where my position has been, and that's where my position will be.
Thank you very much. And Speaker Oceguera.
As the son of a victim of domestic violence, I don't care why Joe voted against those things. I believe that he shouldn't have weakened the Violence Against Women Act. I believe that he should have voted for increased funding to domestic violence programs and rape crisis centers. The Violence Against Women Act eliminated certain classes of women, minorities, gay, lesbian. Are they less of people than others? I don't think so. So it doesn't matter to me why he voted. He should have voted the other way.
Okay, we have time now for the closing statements. Congressman Joe Heck, you're up first.
Well, thanks, Mitch. And first, I want to say that the Violence Against Women Act did not take away any protections for any classification of individuals. Another blatant lie by my opponent. But thanks, Mitch, for moderating. Thanks, Vegas PBS, for hosting us. And thanks, all of you, for tuning in. Again, you've heard two different visions for the future of our country here tonight. You know, we've all had struggles and challenges throughout our lives, whether in our families, in our business, or in our nation. The fact is, what makes America so great is that we've always had the opportunity to overcome those obstacles and make ourselves a better person, a better business, a better nation. I'm running for Congress because I want to make sure that our children and grandchildren have the same or better opportunities than I've had. Sadly, I'm seeing those opportunities slip away. Remember that it is our children and grandchildren that will either reap the benefits or pay the consequences for the decisions we make on November 6th. So if you want to restore our nation to prosperity and ensure that our country remains the land of opportunity for future generations, I ask for your vote. I'm Dr. Joe Heck, and it is an honor to serve as your congressman. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you, and Speaker Oceguera.
Thanks, and I'd like to thank Mitch Fox and PBS for putting this together, and for all of you watching at home. You know, a lot of our friends and neighbors are struggling out there, and all they get from Washington, D.C. is arguing and bickering and fighting, not solving problems. You know, in the legislature, I was known as someone who would work with you. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or a Republican. If you had a good idea, I was going to help you get it done. On the fire department, we didn't pull up on a fire engine to a burning building, jump out and argue about what to do. We put the fire out. We solved the problem. This election is going to be about priorities, and my priorities are going to be the middle class, protecting the middle class, women, seniors, kids, and those who can't stand up for themselves. Congressman Heck's last 2 years have been spent looking out for special interests, looking out for Wall Street, looking out for millionaires and billionaires, and I won't do that. Congressman Heck just doesn't get it. I do.
Thank you. We've come to the conclusion of the program. I'd like to thank Congressman Joe Heck and Speaker John Oceguera for participating, and thank you for watching. Good night.